Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Sunand Sharma, and I'm an Associate Dean here at Sheridan College who will be moderating this session for you today. We'd like to welcome everyone for joining Sheridan's International Education Week webinar, and specifically our webinar today on internationalization and refugee education. Before going any further, it's important that we have a land acknowledgement. I'm also acknowledging that many of you are joining us from other traditional territories, but I'd like to provide a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land for sustaining us and for providing us with the necessities of life. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which emphasize the importance of joint stewardship, peace, and respectful relationships. As we reflect on land acknowledgements, let us remember that we are all stewards of the land and of each other. We recognize the land on which we gather has been and still is the traditional territory of several indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Since time immemorial, numerous indigenous nations and indigenous peoples have lived and passed through this territory. Sheridan affirms it's our collective responsibility to honor the land as we honor and respect those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who have yet to come. We are grateful for the opportunity to be learning, working, and thriving on this land. Thank you. Again, folks, I said good morning, good afternoon, and good evening because I'd like to acknowledge and thank our four speakers, two who are joining us from the nation's capital, one from the GTA, but one as far as Nairobi, Kenya, on the ground doing some amazing work. My interest in moderation of this topic is I have the privilege of overseeing Sheridan's student refugee program, and just a very quick history. In 2016, at the work of our student government and current chair of our local committee, we welcomed our first refugee student to Sheridan College in 2016. Since then, we have welcomed 5 students and currently have 4 current students studying at Sheridan College through the SRP program, which you'll hear from one of our colleagues shortly. 3 of the most recent students to join us have joined us from the International Refugee Olympic team through a new pathway with WUSC. As I said, it's my privilege to oversee and participate in the student refugee program, and we have an amazing local committee who continues to support our students. But without further ado, I'd like to just briefly mention what the topic of what we'll be speaking about today. So only 3% of refugees have access to higher education compared to 37% of the global higher education access rate. Having fled their countries due to conflict and persecution, refugees often find themselves in limbo, where they face barriers to studying, working, and pursuing their passions. This webinar aims to shed light on the global crisis and discuss innovative and collaborative solutions to respond to it. I would like to welcome our first speaker, Mr. Michael Casasola, who is a senior resettlement officer with UNHCR. So that's the United Nations High Commissioners for Refugee in Ottawa. Michael's presentation will provide a brief overview of the growing challenge of forced displacement, the international strategy to expand solutions for refugees, including through education, and the education gaps the refugees face compared to other children and adolescents. Michael, over to you, sir.
Hi, Sunand. Can you see my screen? Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see your screen. If you just want to minimize this one so we can get the actual main presentation up.
Sure, just not quite sure how to, sorry.
So just minimize this.
Fine.
Yep, there we go. So now
okay, sorry.
If you can go into just...
Is that okay, like that?
If you can just play from beginning.
Okay, sorry. From here, forgive me, now I'm all confused. Like that?
There we go, perfect.
Sorry,
Carry on. Yeah, perfect.
Forgive me. So thank you very much, Sunand, for inviting me to this event today. And I first want to start with just acknowledgement and appreciation to Sheridan College, its faculty and staff, for its leadership, its involvement in providing refugees with access to education and both the solution, and how critically important it is at this time. It's been really interesting. The Sheridan's welcoming of the 3 Olympic athletes has really captured the imagination of people, not just in Canada, but internationally. I was part of we were doing a staff retreat a couple of weeks ago, and our Deputy High Commissioner, Kelly Clements, who's in Geneva, was reflecting on a variety of international things going on and key developments in Canada. And she was referencing going, and there's those 3 Olympic athletes who went to Sheridan College. So thank you for welcoming Rose, Paolo, and James to Sheridan. And again, the sort of leadership you've provided in providing opportunities is really critically important. And I hope it'll become transparent as I go through my presentation today. Now, I had had a presentation developed in advance of yesterday, but only to find out just yesterday that there was an update on the number of the global, what we call global trends in terms of the forced human displacement. Now, when we talk about, and the key development is that forced human displacement has increased by 1.6 million over the past 6 months. Now, when I talk about forced human displacement, I'm referring to refugees, I'm referring to asylum seekers, who are people waiting, who've requested basically refugee protection and are waiting for a decision from whatever authorities in their respective countries. But also key in that number is the almost 15 million internally displaced people. These are people who are like refugees, but have not yet crossed the border. Because to be a refugee, you have to have a well-founded fear of persecution linked to 5 different convention grounds, and you also have to cross the border. But there are millions of people who actually don't cross that border, but still are in need of assistance and such. Now, the challenge is, of course, this number tends to go up, the number of forcibly displaced people every 6 months or more every year, given international events and the lack of solutions to many of the conflicts that have created them. And now we're at a point where, as our High Commissioner, Filippo Grandi, says, it's not a question of if the world will reach 100 million forcibly displaced people, but when. Now, UNHCR, our role is given to us by the General Assembly of the United Nations back in 1950, is provide, ensure refugees have international protection when they cross the border, but also to work with states so that they can be able to return to their country, either find a solution, either return to their country of origin, stay where they're located and obtain the rights of a citizen effectively to stay there, or go to resettlement in a third country. Now, this is well known to us in Canada because Canada's got one of the most celebrated ways Canada's involved with assisting refugees is through refugee resettlement. The challenge is of that 84 million persons who are forcibly displaced, 26 million are refugees. And of those 26 million refugees, we're not seeking UNHCR for all of them to be resettled, but we know at least 1.47 million of them are in need of resettlement. Yet, if you look at that blue line, you can see that need has developed over year over year over year. But in reality, the number of places that have been made available to refugees for resettlement is actually in no way keeping with that need. And so we had a low point last year where of all the refugees that UNHCR identifies in need of resettlement, only 22,770 were actually able to benefit. And I'm talking not to Canada, I'm talking to all countries. Much of that is the devastating impact of COVID, but it's also a reflection of the international community has not kept up with the needs that are out there. So recognizing this ongoing trend that there's this gap between needs of refugees and resettlement and solutions, we've developed a plan that's resulting from the Global Compact on Refugees. And we've developed a 3-year plan with states, with partners like WUSC, we will hear from later, to effectively try to achieve 3 goals. One is to grow the number of resettlement places internationally. So countries that resettle refugees, ask them to do more, but also try to find new countries. The second goal is to advance what we call complementary pathways, other legal immigration routes that refugees might take advantage of. So this is not to replace resettlement, but in addition to say, are there other ways refugees can find protection and a solution through other legal immigration routes? But the third goal, and this is one that's sometimes overlooked, but it's critically important in the student refugee program that was referenced at the outset that Sheridan's participating in, is promoting welcoming and inclusive communities. We can't have resettlement unless there's support for the integration of refugees. We can't if there's not a welcoming environment. And we know that the colleges provide, and the faculty and staff play a tremendous role in helping refugees feel welcome and finding their way into integrating into life in Canada. So, but on this second path, complementary pathways, those legal immigration routes, what we're effectively talking about are different examples of legal migration, which are family reunification, for example, or economic immigration. So Canada, for the 400,000 or so economic immigrants supposed to welcome this year, about 200,000 of those spaces are for economic immigration programs. Again, this is not resettlement. And what one of UNHCR's goals with other countries is to say, how can refugees access this opportunities for immigration so that they can find a solution? But in addition to that, of course, is education, scholarships, the role that education can provide in providing not just for a solution, as well as education for refugees. In addition, there are other tracks such as private sponsorship, which is well known in Canada, which we call community sponsorship internationally, which Canada is trying to help promote. So we're trying to, in addition to expanding resettlement, we're trying to develop these pathways internationally so that refugees can find additional solutions. Now, as mentioned at the outset by Sunand, education for refugees is a tremendous challenge, and 68% refugees, compared to other children around the world, refugees have much lower rates of enrollment in school at all levels. Now, we know that from stats and such that there's this tremendous drop for refugee children between primary school and secondary school, and you can see it in the stats right there. There's a variety of reasons for this. One is that there's tremendous pressure upon refugees, adolescents, to drop out of school and support their families. And with the pandemic, where we've seen a harsh economic impact upon refugees, where many who were working in the informal sector have lost employment, etc., the pressures on their families to survive. The children, oftentimes adolescents, are forced to work in difficult situations, sometimes subjected to child labor, to basically try to support their families. And as a result, they drop out of education. They don't enter into secondary school or drop out of secondary school, and of course aren't able to pursue tertiary education also. COVID has had a tremendously terrible impact. These stats actually predate some of the COVID impact, but what we know from 37 countries that were polled, 142 days of school were lost in 2021, or up to March 2021, because of COVID. So we're seeing the impact of COVID. We haven't seen yet what this will mean in terms of education, but that's a tremendous gap in the learning. As we know, Canadian kids were concerned about the gaps of, in terms of just remote education. But for many refugees, remote learning is challenging, if not an option. Whereas, people rely on digital learning, internet connections, suitable devices. Many of these things aren't available for refugees, or the Wi-Fi is questionable. The source, they live in counter conditions where education is not possible. So again, we're waiting to see the impact, where we're expecting that it'll be unfortunate. The other trend I just want to point out to you that isn't shown in the stats here is also the gap between education of boys and the education of girls. The level of girl enrollment in education is 3 to 4 points always, whether it's primary school or secondary school, below boys. And as a result, of course, this is an important challenge for us in terms of how do we ensure that girls are able to access education, at least not just expand the number of refugees participating in schooling at both primary, secondary, and tertiary education levels, but how do we specifically improve the situation of girls? Now, on the tertiary education, the higher level of education, you see that it's 5% at this time, which is well below the global enrollment. Our plan is to try to expand this to 15% by 2030. And the key, of course, for all of this, there's many aspects of tertiary education that need to be developed. And not all of it needs to involve, of course, and as you'll hear from the other panelists, people moving to third countries. How can we expand access to refugees where they're at, and such. And so the plan is quite diverse, and my gift to you is not to read through the plan, but just to acknowledge that part of the plan that we have expanding tertiary education by 2030 also includes this complementary pathway of education as a pathway for refugees. So I'm going to stop there, and just with providing you with that overview. Thank you so much. And again, I want to once again express my appreciation to Sheridan, its faculty, for your leadership, and continue to encourage you to continue to be such advocates and provide education and support for refugees through tertiary education. Thank you again.
Thank you, Michael. We look forward to hearing from you in our question and answer portion. But to me, there's two things that jump out. There's many things that jump out, but I think the one word that resonates with me is perspective. When I hear that 142 days lost, perspective is very important. The last thing is I love the correlation between building the foundation and welcoming and inclusive communities, because that is a major pillar of Sheridan's internationalization and global connectivity framework. So that is a wonderful correlation. I just thank you so much for your time. And we'll see you very shortly, sir, in the question and answer period.
Thank you.
I see many comments going on in the chat that folks are loving the content so far. Without further ado, I'm going to welcome another friend to the stage. Katharine Im-Jenkins is the Chief Programs Officer for WUSC. Katharine uses the pronouns she, her, and en français, elle. Her presentation will focus on how WUSC is integrating durable solutions for young refugees across our programming, and the very important role that post-secondary institutions in Canada and globally can play in responding to the refugee crisis. Katharine, over to you.
Thanks very much, Sunand. Thanks for the introduction and certainly for the invitation. It's wonderful to be amidst the Sheridan College community today, and of course also to be joined by three excellent panelists whose work I follow closely, and some of whom I get to collaborate with in my work with WUSC and greatly admire. So I'm joining you here today in Ottawa from the unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territories. And it's really my pleasure to join this session on International Education Week on a topic that is very close to my heart, refugee education. So we've talked a little bit already about the Student Refugee Program, and I'll tell you a little bit more. So this program is a really unique program. It is a program that offers protection to young refugees through an educational opportunity, a post-secondary scholarship. And it's powered by this incredible network of students and in post-secondary institutions across coast to coast to coast across Canada. It has really deep roots, including the origins of my organization, which date back to the faculty and student movements in support and solidarity of each other between the two world wars, and trying to respond to students and scholars who were displaced by those events. And so we continue that work today. So a little bit more detail about the Student Refugee Program. Since 1978, we've been able to resettle almost 2,500 students from 39 different countries. Currently, the program is resettling students from many countries of origin, but most of them are based in countries of asylum such as Kenya, Jordan, Lebanon, Malawi, and we will be opening a new Afghanistan stream to support the emerging needs of Afghan students who have been displaced by the takeover of the Taliban earlier this year. In Canada, we have an incredible network, which Sheridan is a wonderful part of more than 100 post-secondary institutions, and more than 1,000 volunteer students, faculty, staff members, community members who really are the foundation of that welcoming that we've been talking about. So this program is really made possible by the work of all of these students and of course the support that they receive from faculty members like you, Sunand. So I don't want to just talk about the SRP because I know most people know about it. I also wanted to share a little bit more with the audience today about some of the other work that WUSC is doing. I think what we heard from Michael and all of his contacts and trends is really alarming in terms of the state of the global displacement crisis and the state of access to education for refugees. So we at WUSC, alongside many other partners, are working closely to see if we can create more opportunities, leveraging education as a potential pathway and really taking this global. So we're really proud of the history and the tradition of the SRP and of the accomplishments of the SRP that we have in partnership with so many institutions. And we want to be part of a global movement to expand more opportunities to young people around the world. So in the last number of years, we've been working closely with UNHCR and some of Michael's colleagues, as well as many other university networks, Association Universelle Francophonie, Open Society Universities Network, the government of Portugal, some organizations in Japan and Mexico, lots of countries who are keen to find solutions, come up with tailor-made solutions that work for their context, but also build on the knowledge and expertise that WUSC has developed with our network on the SRP. So this task force is advocating for how different actors, governments, universities, colleges, can use scholarships, educational opportunities to create pathways for students to find opportunities in third countries. We also want to make sure that we're sharing tools and resources and having strong standards in these sorts of programs. So this community is coming together, and we're really rolling up our sleeves and getting this work done. And we really want to contribute to that 15 by 30 goal that Michael was talking about. So coming back closer to home, one of the other ways that WUSC is trying to respond to the displacement crisis is through innovation and experimentation and more partnerships that build on the strength of the student refugee program. So here we have this wonderful made at home example of the partnership that we have with the Sheridan local committee to welcome the 3 refugee athletes. And this is, I think, so exciting in so many different ways, not only because it's creating opportunities through a sports pathway for different students from different backgrounds who have different talents and aspirations to pursue, but also that it's a way to connect with the rich and robust Canadian athletic community to perhaps get folks who may not normally know and learn about refugee issues aware and engaged. And so many other reasons. So I think we're all pretty excited about this partnership, and we really hope that we can work with the UNHCR and the International Olympic Committee to continue to offer opportunities to student athletes. I had the opportunity to participate in the welcome event that the Sheridan team organized earlier this year to welcome Rose and James, Wafa, and did I get everybody? I think I forgot one. Anyway, and so you see the photo here. It was a wonderful event. And as I said at the event, WUSC, when we were planning this, we knew that Sheridan would be a great partner for this initial program, not only because of the strength of the local committee, but because of the strength of the institution overall, how strongly connected you are to the communities that you're in, and that welcoming, supportive atmosphere that you offer all students. Another example that I'm excited to share with this group today is a partnership that WUSC has with Casasola College, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, as well as a number of businesses in the tourism sector, actually in British Columbia. So this program we call HaEun, which is kind of a play on words, and it's an employment-linked pathway. So again, that experimentation around different ways, like Michael was suggesting in his presentation, different ways that we can create pathways and opportunities for refugees to find protection and also pursue their aspirations. So what we like about this is that it's a win-win-win partnership for the students who are selected. They do an accelerated training program with Casasola and are placed in a job opportunity with our industry partners. And so it accelerates their integration into Canada. They're selected actually in Kenya, and you'll hear later from Phyllis, one of our colleagues her organization plays a role in that process. And we work to prepare these students while they're waiting their arrival here in Canada. So this program is new, and we're excited to see what can happen as a result. We had some delays related to the pandemic, as you might imagine. And so we were able to welcome the first cohort this year, and we will welcome a second cohort in January. Again, what I think is so exciting about this is, much like we mobilize the post-secondary community for the student refugee program, here we're able to tap into industry. We're able to have different segments of Canadian society play different roles in responding to the global displacement crisis. And we're also able to make really practical contributions to the Canadian economy, to help address labor shortages, to accelerate that integration, to create opportunities for connection and community to be built. So this is another program that I think we're hoping to scale up and to share on the global stage. There's a lot of, I think, creativity and innovation in the pathway space right now. It is certainly not without its challenges, but I think these are some of the initiatives to watch. So I'd like to just wrap up, because I know we have primarily a post-secondary institution audience, and I would just like to say that there are so many different ways beyond, of course, participating in the student refugee program that we feel institutions can engage and respond. I was reading through Sheridan's internationalization strategy earlier this week, and the ethos of that around creating these welcoming spaces, connecting digitally, including these issues in the curriculum, in the pedagogy, certainly in the research agenda. There are just so many opportunities to engage with this issue of the forced displacement crisis and for post-secondary institutions to contribute. And so there's some ideas here. I would just say, in all of this, my advice would be to also consider how you're partnering with refugees as you do this. And so that can be, that can look differently. And I think, HaEun in her presentation later is going to tell us a little bit more about how they're doing that at York in her initiative. So thanks again, and looking forward to continuing the conversation with everyone.
Thank you so much, Kat. I really appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you at the question and answer period. But I just wanted to say thank you. I can appreciate the innovative and creativity in terms of the pathways, and we are direct beneficiaries of the newest athletic pathway through to education with both your organization and UNHCR. So thank you with respect to that. I can't help but think, I stayed in academia because of the power of education to transform lives. And we witness it, and we continue to hope to partner with your organization to continue to bring those opportunities to many more refugee students. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you shortly. All right, folks, to our third speaker. If I could please welcome Miss Phyllis Mureu to the stage. Phyllis is the executive director of Windle International, Kenya and Somalia. And it's actually 8 o'clock in the evening, and Miss Phyllis is joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. Phyllis would like to focus on the work in providing education to refugees and providing different pathways to education, one of which is the international option and also the internationally recognized certification. Phyllis has a wealth of experience in education and emergencies in both Kenya and Somalia, and she's been in the field for the last 15 years. Ms. Phyllis, over to you with respect to your presentation.
Thank you, Sunand. Thank you very much once again, Sunand, for the introduction, and also thank you to Sheridan College for giving me this opportunity to share our experience in supporting education for the displaced persons. Just for the sake of the audience to know that Windle International Kenya has been in operation for the last 40 years, and within that period, we've also been supporting education for refugees. We've been working closely with WUSC, and I'm happy that Kat is part of the panel. We've been working closely with UNHCR. We have Mike on board. And of course, from the picture actually you have on my first page is the project that we do together with York University, and HaEun will be talking more about that in her presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. As mentioned by Micah in his presentation, that one of the challenges that the youth face in the camps is the limited education opportunities, especially at the higher level. From Michael's presentation, you could see that the bulk of the support is at the primary level, where the students are at 68%, and secondary school at 34%, but at tertiary level was only 5%. So you can see there's a big disparity between the students who graduate from high school and those who end up getting onto university. In Kenya, we have two camps, the Dadaab and the Kakuma refugee camps, and they host the populations that come from the conflict areas, but the majority of them come from Somalia and South Sudan. But we do also have other communities from DRC, from Uganda, Burundi, and Ethiopia. But the bulk of the population is from Somalia and South Sudan. Of course, part of the challenge that we face in providing education is and high enrollment of overage learners who are not able to continue with their education because of conflict. And this makes it also difficult for them also to move from one level to the next. And that is also a group that we have to support to ensure that they do not drop out, and also increase the number of them that get into the higher education. And when Katharine was talking, she mentioned about tertiary education opportunities. And one of the things that we also experience is the limited opportunities that are there. One, because of financing, it's very expensive to support university education. And that also means that the scholarships that are available are also limited, and they're very competitive. For example, the scholarship that we support through WUSC, the Student Refugee Program, that scholarship is very popular among the refugees in Kenya. But unfortunately, we only get about 55 slots per year. And sometimes you have about 1,500 students competing for those slots. So the competition is very high. Through UNHCR, we also get additional slots for opportunities for students to pursue their degree courses in Kenya. But again, compared to the number of slots available and the students applying, the numbers are always limited. Then we do have the other challenge. Sometimes some of the refugees come into the country and they have done their high school in their home country. But then for them to access education in any of the Kenyan institutions, they have to ensure that the certificates they have are acceptable by the Ministry of Education. And sometimes that does not work well, and they may have to repeat some units in order for them to access a higher education. That means instead of going forward, you have to go backwards in order for you to move. Then the other challenge, and Kat mentioned it, the number of girls who transition from each level keeps going down. At the beginning, normally at the primary level, the ratio is almost 50-50. As they go into secondary school, the numbers drop. And then at university level, it really drops. So those are some of the challenges that we also see as we try to provide university education. Next slide, please. Why do we provide education in our intervention? As an organization, we strongly believe that education transforms society. And when we look at the population that we serve, we believe that the only thing that the refugees are able to take away from the camps, especially in the context of Kenya, it's only education. That's the only thing that no matter what happens, once they have learned, once they have acquired that skill, it can't be taken away. And that is what can help them access the options that are there. We talk about opportunities that exist in third country or opportunities that exist also within the country, but they can only take advantage of those opportunities if they are educated and they have the skills that they require. There's support that we provide to the refugees. We don't only just do it in our programs in Kenya, but we also do the same in the other countries where we are intervening in education. We are doing this in Uganda, Sudan, South Sudan, and more recently in Somalia. Next slide, please. As we support the students in higher education, we are also very aware of the needs and the changes that happen in the 21st century. And we try to look at what is the nature of our population. One of the things that we accept about the population that we serve is that they're very mobile. And this is because either they have conflicts that are man-made in their countries, or what we are dealing with at the moment in Kenya, drought, which is making people move from Somalia into Kenya and from South Sudan into Kenya. So that means you get more people coming into the refugee camps, not only because of conflict, but because of also of other natural phenomena. We also are aware that sometimes there is competing priorities between earning a living and acquiring skills. So sometimes we have to ensure that the kind of education we provide is flexible enough to be able to accommodate those unique requirements of our population. Then we also do work towards making sure that as much as possible that we are supporting both boys and girls, because we do realize that development can only be sustainable if it benefits both men and women. So higher education opportunities which are able to accommodate both genders and provide same opportunities are always a good option for us. Also, we look at how do we provide this education. And with COVID, we have seen, and Michael mentioned, that students have lost a lot of their school time because of the the COVID, and the schools had to be closed down. So we are looking at what are the opportunities that are there that enable the students who come from the refugee communities that they are able to continue with their education without being interrupted. But even when those interruptions happen, that they are not disadvantaged. We have seen through COVID, the people who are already marginalized because of other situations like drought, conflict, and so on, were further marginalized because of technology. In most of the camps where we work, internet connectivity is not very stable. In some areas is not even available. So that means the students who needed to access their classes using technology, they were not able to do that, and that put them at a more disadvantage. Next slide, please. Next slide. Sorry, the previous one, this one. Thank you. So through the partnerships with the different universities, we are able to support the students. And currently we have 9 different tertiary scholarships that we are supporting in Kenya, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, and Somalia. And we do this through the different partnerships that we have created over the years. The beauty with these partnerships, we have them in country and also outside the country, and then we are able to provide solutions to the students depending on what they're eligible to take advantage of. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as part of our intervention and in order to increase access to university education, and I have alluded it to it before, the partnerships with the in-country university helps us to have more students access higher education, because not everybody will be able to get a scholarship outside the country. So if we can get as many as possible students into the universities in country, then that means that we have more students who graduate from high school accessing higher education. Then we have partnerships with universities outside the country, and through this we work in close collaboration with WUSC under the SRP program. I mentioned it before, we get 55 slots every year from the SRP program, and that means that the students have an opportunity to access education outside of Kenya. As I mentioned before, financing for higher education is a challenge, and we have found that also using blended models as part of delivering education is another way of increasing the number of students who access higher education. My colleague HaEun will be talking more about the BHER model that we are currently running in the Dadaab refugee camp, and she will explain how that has helped to increase the number of teachers in the Dadaab refugee camp. Then we also use the on-job training, and we have a model of quality secondary education. And this, we work again with universities to provide ongoing training, and especially for the refugee teachers. One of the challenges that we have seen before is that as much as we would like to have more students transition to university, if they are not doing very well in their high school, then we will not have the numbers that we need. And sometimes that part of their success is pegged on how well prepared or what type of teacher that they have in class. And one way of ensuring that we are increasing those numbers is also ensuring that our teachers are well trained. Next slide, please. We've seen a number of benefits in using the different models to deal with the challenges of university education access for the refugees. And one of the benefits is through the partnerships that we have with the universities and doing a lot of advocacy, we get this refugee student admitted into the in-country institution on the same entry behavior as the national students. They are not required to have special entry behavior, neither are they required to do an additional course in order to access the university education, but they are given the same opportunity as the nationals, so long as they meet the minimum grade like everybody else. We also have the opportunity to send the students to third countries like Canada, as I mentioned before, and we do also have some partnerships with universities in UK, especially for the postgraduate level of education. As I mentioned, regarding the limited resources that are available for higher education, the blended models have really helped in increasing the number of refugees who are accessing the university education, and at the same time, they are cost effective, but they also help us to increase the number of female students who access education, because in some cases, some families don't want their daughters to go away from home, and using the blended models, that has helped to increase the number of the female students. Then of course, the other benefit is having teachers who are trained, and that means that we have more teachers who are in the schools drawn from the refugee community. And the beauty with that is, if they already are skilled teachers and already working in the schools, it means that even when they move back home, or if they transition to a third country, those skills are still relevant and they can be of use. And of course, with some universities, they have been able to provide subsidized tuition fees for the refugees, making it easier for us to put more refugees into school. Next slide, please. What are some of the opportunities that still exist out there for us to be able to provide more students with access to university education? One is maybe doing more advocacy with the host governments to consider student loans schemes for refugees. I know, for example, in Kenya and Uganda, the government provides student loan schemes for their national students, but they do not do that to the refugee students. So that's part of our advocacy to see whether that can be done. The other one is to work closely with the private sector to provide internship opportunities for the refugees, to give them an experience. What is it that the market requires? What does the industry require? What is it that they need to have in place so that when they do actually get into the industry, they are prepared for it? In terms of additional support for the female students, especially the ones who are young mothers, providing them with additional stipend to be able to support their children so that they are able to continue being in school and they don't have to drop out. And of course, there are those students who have gone through the cycle of higher education and they have acquired skills that can be of use. And this is one area that is good because it gives them an opportunity to give back to the society and also back to the same communities that they came from, and also to the current student through opportunities such as career development and counseling sessions. Next slide, please. And I say once again, thank you, Sunand, and thank you very much, Sheridan College. We made this opportunity to be part of the webinar. Thank you.
I think the thank you goes to you and to Windle for all the amazing work that you're doing on the ground. And I know I had some questions in light of some of the recent announcements about the camps in Kenya that we'll hold for the Q&A section. I think it's so amazing that our speakers and our organizations are so interrelated and working towards the same cause. So just a thank you to you, and I look forward to seeing you shortly in our question and answer period. Before we welcome our next guest to the stage, I just want to encourage the participants, those who are joining us for the webinar, that we would welcome your questions for our speakers in the chat or in the Q&A function. And that following HaEun, the next presenter, we will be opening it up to questions. So again, our fourth and final speaker is Ms. HaEun Kim, who is a project administrator for the Borderless Higher Education for Refugees, a development project led by York University. This presentation will introduce and share lessons learned through York's University's Borderless Higher Education for Refugee project and its decade of work in providing blended, accredited teacher education programs to untrained refugee and local teachers in the encampments of Dadaab, Kenya. HaEun, over to you.
Thank you, Sunand. And I also want to echo thanks to the rest of the Sheridan team for putting this panel together. So as Sunand shared, my name is HaEun Kim. And for the past 5 years, I have worked for the Borderless Higher Education for Refugees project, and or BEAR, as we like to call it. So the BEAR project was first conceptualized back in 2010 by Professor Winona Giles, who is the former co-director of the project. And it was then that partners from Kenya and Canada were first brought together to consider new opportunities and models for offering higher education for refugees. So the project first put together a feasibility study, and it was this study that informed the launch of BEAR programs in Dadaab, where York and our partners have been working since 2013. And today I just want to share our experiences and some reflections after 10 years of operations. So just to begin, the BEAR consortium consists of Kenyan and Canadian universities and NGOs, and the project draws on both Canadian and Kenyan expertise to develop and enhance professional teaching capacities through in-situ university programs. And because of this, our admissions is focused on untrained refugee and local teachers, or those who are interested in the teaching profession. And we partner with Windle and LWF, who are the implementers of secondary and primary education in Dadaab. So York University leads this initiative. And for the first 5 years of the project, 4 university partners, 2 from Kenya, 2 from Canada, both work together to offer primary and secondary teaching credentials. Since 2018, because funding has scaled back, we are currently only offering the primary teaching stream, primary programs, but we continue to work right here in Dadaab. So this is an aerial view of the encampments. And Phyllis has already shared some contextual information about the camps, but they have been in operation for about 30 years now. And opportunities for higher education in the camps are limited. International scholarships are available, but as Phyllis shared, that they are highly competitive and often reserved for the top performing students. And this is where the blended model is able to help increase access by providing opportunities for those to study directly in the camps. So these are a few pictures from our learning center. So the learning center, the BEAR Learning Center, is what we call our campus, and it was constructed back in 2013. And this infrastructure has allowed for the project to reach a greater number of students at a cost benefit, while maintaining the delivery of high quality programs and the safety of both students and staff. And I think that for the bulk of young refugees who attend high school in Dadaab with lower KCSE scores. So KCSE is the high school national exam, and oftentimes university admissions is contingent on your KCSE scores. So for the bulk of students who have a lower KCSE grade, for women who and men, but a lot of the times women who cannot leave home due to familial responsibilities, as well as older refugees who were displaced after high school, or those who may not necessarily have the Kenyan high school documentation. Opportunities for these scholarships are scarce, and the blended model offers new opportunities for them to continue their learning where they are at. So this is a flowchart of the different programmatic streams in BEAR. On the left is the primary stream, where students are able to earn a certificate and then a diploma in primary education from York and Kenyatta. And on the right is the secondary diploma that was offered jointly by UBC and Moi. And students were able to take the credits that they earned at the certificate and diploma level and get them transferred into their bachelor's degrees. So 2 cohorts of students were serviced through this model for over 5 years. Since 2018, as I mentioned before, operations have scaled back, but we continue to operate with the support of Open Society Foundations and York University in offering the primary stream in Dadaab. And an exciting development that's occurred despite the scale back in funding is that back in 2018, we were able to pilot a master's program here under phase 5. So we began offering a master's degree in the camps, and it was very successful, and we have continued to offer graduate studies in Dadaab ever since. So the BEAR model follows 4 key principles: stackability, portability, gender equity and inclusivity, as well as peaceful coexistence with the host community in the Northeast. And most of these principles sort of speak for themselves, but I think the only thing I want to highlight here is the stackability piece. So our programs are designed so that if students relocate, so for example, if a student completes a certificate and they find a job back in Somalia, they can end with the certificate and move on and still earn that year-long credential. So they're able to stop their studies, still have an accredited credential, and move on to the next phase of their employment or other opportunities that come to them. And I think this was a great sort of achievement that BEAR was able to do with its 4 university partners. And all academic programs are offered free to refugee and local students who are serviced by BEAR. This is just a snapshot of all the students that we've engaged with. So since 2013, we've engaged with over 400 individual students. Currently, York University has 60 active students. When we first started, I just want to acknowledge briefly here that you can see from the numbers that the participation percentages of women are low in certain cohorts. And a lot of that has to do with low KCSE scores barring them from admissions, particularly in the secondary stream in science programs and in the Kenyan institutions. But something I do want to highlight that isn't in the stats is that what we found was that once the women who were admitted into the program were afforded accommodations by their instructors and provided with the supports and flexibility that they needed. For example, providing childcare space at the Learning Center, or enabling extensions, or giving women the chance to retake a course if they had to miss a semester because they gave birth. If these accommodations were given, the retention rates of women soared. And in the first cohort of York degree programs in Dadaab, we had an 83% retention rate of women versus the overall average of 67%. And in cohort 2, 100% of the women were retained in York programs versus the overall average of 83%. So I think that, what this tells us is that once women are given the chance and they're afforded the flexibility that they need, that their commitment is strong, if not stronger, than their male counterparts to their studies. for the remainder of the presentation, I just want to share 3 key lessons and just a short reflection. The first has to do with university partnerships and collaborations. And so the idea is that universities can work in humanitarian settings, but in order to do so, strong collaboration among partners is essential. And I think that this is one of those lessons that is obvious in principle, but difficult in practice. And over the last 10 years, although I've only been around for 5, but I know that over the last decade, that BEAR has really challenged both Canadian and Kenyan universities to look beyond their physical campus and to really rethink what it means to deliver quality programs in settings like Dadaab to refugee populations whose access to learning and resources is severely limited. And there is an unpredictability and tension when working in such environments. And oftentimes it seems like there is never a simple solution for anything, whether it's transporting books or making sure students get to class. Even the things that we take for granted, it's something always comes up. And really the success of delivering programs in these types of spaces, from our experience, hinges on partnerships and creative collaboration. I think that genuine commitment from leadership in each institution is vital. So too is the flexibility of that leadership to work in response to changes, both internally within their individual programs and institutions, and also externally in the refugee camps where things happen outside of our control and we just need to find ways to make it work. So creativity, commitment, and flexibility all are needed on the part of universities and NGOs. But I think that the success of BEAR programs over the last 8 years has demonstrated that it can be done and that it should be done. The second lesson is one that's a little closer to my heart because I come from a teaching background. And I'll just read it out loud. So the second lesson learned is that should travel be permitted, I had to add this caveat because of our last year and a half with COVID, but should travel be permitted, a combination modes of delivery is most effective. So the blended approach that Phyllis and myself have outlined. And even though online programming is ideally suited and completely justified in emergency settings such as Dadaab and over the last year within the context of COVID-19. It is not by itself sufficient, and it does not make for, I think, a quality learning experience, both for the learner and for the instructor. And my philosophy with learning and education is that I see learning as a relational experience, and oftentimes it requires vulnerability and trust. And while there are great potentials to the reach of online learning and technology, I think that there are also limits to what can be done over Zoom, for example. And over the years, again, within the context of Dadaab, we have learned that our students in the camps need considerable support and guidance in order to become successful learners, both online and offline. We are a university from the global north, and to be successful in an English language Canadian university program, our students needed training and practice in various technologies. They needed a lot of instructor contact to become accustomed to a new English, new literacies, new study and assessment structures, modes of communicating, For example, learning email etiquette and different communication skills and study skills. All of these things, our students required a scaffolded approach, and they needed opportunities to practice this type of learning through a blended face-to-face and online sessions before we were able to venture into the fully online model. And I think that BEAR would strongly encourage any university or educational institution considering working in these spaces to consider blended forms and to make sure that the physical infrastructure necessary is there for their delivery. And I think that we've seen the benefits of blended structures really manifest both for the instructor as well as the learner. So the final lesson learned I want to share is the importance of building in opportunities for reciprocity in our program. So I'll start with this photo. So this is a picture of one of our graduate students, our master's students working with Don Dippo right here. He is the co-director of BEAR, but he's also a course director. And our student is working as a peer mentor for the course that Don is teaching. So in the same way that course directors in Canada have graduate student TAs, instructors in BEAR have graduate student peer mentors. And as peer mentors, they work with course directors and are mentored on how to teach, how to assess and grade, and how to support students in a university course. And I think that the BEAR dream is that one day our graduate students will become the course directors of the courses that we teach. But when we began implementing this peer mentor model, we understood the value of capacity building, but we didn't fully realize the full value of local capacity building until COVID-19 struck. And at the end of the day, it is local actors who are able to enact lasting solutions. And in the case of BEAR, our peer mentors were integral to keeping our programs active during COVID. And I think in the larger context of universities working in new spaces, I think that development projects need to take a participatory approach in ensuring that students or the populations that they are working with are collaborating with partners and being given leadership roles, opportunities, learning relevant, transferable skills. And of course, a reciprocal approach entails additional time. It entails training and resources, as meaningful capacity building needs to take place first. And these opportunities need to happen in order to build up students into researchers, adult educators, community leaders, and more. I think that related to the last slide, our master's program has really enabled our students to engage and write about the field of education and forced migration studies. And I think that the knowledge production and mobilization and advocacy work initiated by our students, I think that it really is the growth and aspirations of what they see and what they want to do. Like those are the things that will enact the changes that they want to see in Dadaab and beyond. This is my last slide. So I just want to end with one final reflection. And this is one that our team has been grappling with for the last while. I think after 10 years of working in one place, we are really starting to see meaningful impact emerge. And because we have gotten to know the space and the community, and because of the relationships built and the knowledge incurred, we were able to innovate in ways that was never intended. I don't think that when the project began, we imagined graduate programs with nearly 50% women. But now we are at a point where the research and knowledge created by our students is informing our practice, and our students themselves, they see themselves as the agents for change in Dadaab and the Northeast region. And what we've learned, I think, through our practice is that sustainable changes take time. And I think this has to do with the point on fostering inclusive communities that Michael, that the UNHCR is targeting. But sustainable changes take time, but oftentimes this type of long-term engagement is at odds with the industry of development, where donors tend to lose interest once you've realized project outcomes. And the trend is to scale, to expand, and to replicate. But we have found, in the case of York through Bear, that the continued investment and innovations in one space really compound and yield great things. And it feels like we are beginning to delve into the work of peace building and change enacted by our students. But the project is very much constrained by the reality of resources. Regardless, I think I want to end the presentation with this idea of quality and long-term engagement and the investment that it yields. And we're at a point now where it's our students and their knowledge that inform the vision and practice of what we do. And I hope that more universities, more institutions, more organizations will find ways to invest and innovate in and work in new spaces, because as we have seen, the need is great. So thank you all for listening. And if I went over time, I'm so sorry. I just saw the chat.
Absolutely no problem. I really, as with many of our participants here, really enjoyed your presentation, and thank Bear for the work that they're doing in country. HaEun, I can't really help but think that your lessons learned are so applicable not only in home country but everywhere. The importance of that relational experience with students and their faculty, the building of trust, the hybrid models, the peer-to-peer, about giving the tools to the next generation to be part of the next solution. I think that that is absolutely amazing, and I thank you very much for your presentation. At this point, folks, I think we're going to be bringing our speakers to the stage to open up a question and answer period. There was one specific question for Ms. Phyllis after her presentation that I'd like to start with. And the question and comment is in relation to, first of all, great presentation, but a question in relation to if you are working with colleges and technology institutes in Kenya who have partnerships with institutions in Canada, and making the comment and observation that applied education and training, like what is offered at Sheridan and Casasola colleges, seems to be very relevant to refugee needs. So Phyllis, did you want to kindly speak to that, please?
Thank you, Sunand. Yes, just to confirm, yes, we have partnership with many of the universities that work with other institutions like Mastercard. I'm aware, for example, at the moment, Mastercard is working closely with universities like USIU, Kenyatta University, Nairobi University, and those are the places where we have our students. So it helps to have those partnerships in place, because when they do advertise for the scholarships, then we are able to lobby and ask, can we also have additional scholarships for the refugee students from Kakuma or Dadaab? Thank you.
Great. Another question is in reference to comment and closing comments that HaEun made, and that was meaningful and sustainable changes take time, as echoed by the York-U partnership. What lessons, and this is open to everyone, what lessons can be drawn for funding models that have 12 and 18-month periods in this space?
I have some thoughts. I think Jane, HaEun, you raise a really critical point, and something that, of course, all of us really struggle with. I think the unique funding model for the student refugee program is a critical factor for its success. So the whole of institution approach, the contributions that come from across the institution, whether that be students, the institution itself, community members, other fundraising modalities, I think that has been absolutely essential for the success of the program, and for the program to have 40 years through all sorts of changes, through a pandemic, through political dynamics, you name it. I think what I was reflecting on listening to each of the presentations and this conversation, I think, Sheridan, you guys have curated such a perfect panel, a real snapshot and a case study of a context where Canadian organizations, Canadian institutions that are connected to Kenyan institutions have really engaged in an ecosystem and an education system in really interesting ways, and in ways that build upon each other's work. And that has happened, I think, both organically and intentionally. I've been with WUSC for 14 years, and certainly we've been partnering with Windle for 30 years. And some of the work that WUSC and Windle do together on primary and secondary education in Dadaab is part of why HaEun, I think you're seeing more women get into your program as they mature. But part of the work that the BEAR program is doing in training educators is feeding back into the success of that program, that very program that WUSC and Windle are running at lower levels. And so we can see these different connections across our initiatives, and they, don't always come together in the ways that we would like to, because we're all working on this sort of the way in which the humanitarian response system is funded on these short-term agreements. But there is this concerted effort, I think, that we are all making to build on top of each other's work, to coordinate across. So I think, Jane, the question you asked is a real challenge, and is, I think, a structural barrier to taking this work further faster. But I would say, that there are ways to kind of really lean into that tension and really manage it.
Thanks, Kat. I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis just with respect to just comments on short-term funding, then over to Michael, please.
Thank you, Sunand. I just wanted to mention that sometimes the short-term funding for maybe 12 months or 18 months is also an opportunity for some of the refugees who have part funding from other sources, but they don't have the full funding. So if they get another person who is willing to meet them halfway, it ensures that then they are able to remain in school for the full term. So it doesn't go to waste if it's structured properly. It does help meet the gap that we see. Thank you.
I just wanted to offer just some other reflections and maybe some contradictions around funding and such. I mean, we're working in an environment where, like for UNHCR, we're not by any means suggesting we provide the totality of services for refugees, when there are many other UN agencies, NGO partners, and such that play critical roles and provide critical services to refugees. That being said, our budget's $9 billion a year globally, and I never imagined when I started with UNHCR in 2002. I remember my boss at the time said, "We'll never go above $1 billion," and we're at $9 billion in terms, and that's based on need. That's not what we get. That's what the need is, right? We have gotten to $5 billion, which is amazing in terms of statistics. But what it means is that some things don't get funded, and we work in an annual planning cycle. We're moving now to a more multi-year planning cycle. But the concept is for UNHCR, you deal with emergencies, you deal with humanitarian assistance. This concept that refugees does arrive. Yet you've talked. Look, if you listen to HaEun, the presentations, you talk about Dadaab camp. That camp has been there since the 90s, the early 90s, right? And if you depend on which academic you talk to today, if a refugee becomes a refugee tomorrow, they may be a refugee for the next 18 to 20 plus years. Yet the cycle we work on is sort of, okay, here's an emergency, get them the food, get them the latrines, get them, so there's dysentery, get them some general protection assistance. And often things like education can be put off for a time until they sort of, well, you will see how this works out. Maybe they'll be able to go back, maybe we won't. And so education is really always one of these vulnerable funding areas, because you're always prioritizing the immediate problems of whatever assistance. Whenever there's a gap, do we continue to that program for secondary school education for girls, for example, right? So it's a constant challenge, and it's constantly on the edge in terms of an area that, which is vital to the life and well-being of all people and of young people. Yet, because of funding and funding models and these contradictions, oftentimes it's really in a, overusing the word, vulnerable situation. Pardon me.
Thank you, Michael. I can't help but bring up some of the announcements in relation to some of the camps and potential closures in Kenya. I'd like to open that up to folks with respect to any comment, because that could possibly further displace or cause. And I know that your organizations are currently still digging through this, but I'm just curious about some preliminary comments with respect to some of the announcements.
Michael, do you want to say something from UNHCR perspective, or should I?
Well, you're on the ground, and I'll say something first. So please go ahead.
Okay. All right. So in the Kenyan context, at the moment, we do have the call from the government to close the Dadaab and Kakuma camps, and we have a timeline until June 2022. But what has happened is that the government and UNHCR are working on a pathway that they have agreed upon, and there were 6 activities that needed to be done for that to happen. So I don't want to say the camps will not close, but I would like to say that those activities are still ongoing. They are not yet completed. So as it stands, maybe the camps are not going to close as soon as tomorrow, because there's a lot of work to be done. One of the activities that needs to be done is, as you know, the camps really are placed in areas where the populations are marginalized. So you will find there are people who lived in those areas before the refugees moved in. And when the refugees came and they saw the kind of support that was being provided, then they registered as refugees. So we do need to identify the population we're dealing with, who is the refugee and who is the Kenyan. So that process needs to be completed even before we can decide, do we close the camp? Because if we do the identification of who is who, we might maybe end up saying, okay, we have 100% Kenyan, so the camps remain, but then they become the responsibility of the Kenyan government, or the reverse happens and we discover everybody who is there is a refugee. Then what do we do with that population? Yeah, thank you.
Just thank you, Phyllis. And Phyllis is on the ground, so she would know more about how these issues and this agreement is developing. I think I just wanted to make just a couple of reflections. First, we're grateful to the government of Kenya. As I mentioned earlier, they've been hosting refugees for decades and have been waiting for a plan in terms of what is the solution, what is it. And the reality with refugee work, UNHCR works on refugees, but we don't solve the political problems that create them. It's up to the international community to do that. And so the ongoing conflicts, and this is one of the problems we have, where the international community is it has let so many conflicts fester and continue to allow for displacement over so many years, that that is the root of the problem, right? And I don't want to suggest by any means it's easy. It is a challenge, but until those problems are solved, refugees aren't able to return in safety and dignity, which is what we'd ideally be working towards. But that being said, I also want to acknowledge, yes, there's a pathway, and again, obviously we're concerned about refugees aren't effectively in any context dumped across borders, because that's not a solution. That only leads to them going to some other place and such, and we don't want to create a humanitarian crisis. But at the same time, these various states in the global south, which host the majority of the world's refugees, to be fair, host the majority of the most displaced, see the examples of Western countries and their externalization of protection, the barriers that they're putting up to protection. And the questions come up because they're at those meetings, they see what's happening. So why are we having to do this when, the Western states aren't providing effective protection and such, or I shouldn't say effective protection. But again, when they see bad examples in other states, this can exacerbate some of these problems.
Can I just add very briefly to what Phyllis and Michael said? I don't want to comment on the specifics of the situation in Kenya, but I do want to say, kind of building off your point, Michael, and what you said, HaEun, in your presentation about portability of education, and that being a worthwhile investment, no matter what the solution is, if it's a voluntary repatriation, if it's a resettlement to a third country, if it's integrating to a local context, education is going to be a very, very smart investment no matter what. And so I think that's something that I always take away in these broader contexts where there's a lot of political complexity and uncertainty. I think we can be assured of the value of the investment in education.
Thanks, Kat. HaEun, over to you for comment, and then I have one last question for everyone.
Yeah, I think just building off of what Kat just shared, most of the students currently enrolled in BEAR in Dadaab are Somali, and I think that Dadaab's proximity to the Somali border makes it a little bit of a unique context where the border is quite porous and people will move back and forth. But the thing that I want to add is listening to our students and just the aspirations they have for the future is they want to return. And the Kenyan government, ideally, we want to see a peaceful Northeast region where people are living safely and able to access all the things that they need. But again, just to, the students who grew up in the camps, they one day envision a peaceful Somalia and they want to return. And we found that a lot of our graduates, once they're armed with an accredited university degree, they're able to go back and find opportunities in civil society, in international NGOs, but only with the credentials that they have are they able to facilitate for themselves a meaningful return. And there are voluntary repatriation programs, I think, through the UNHCR, but just anecdotally from what I've seen, when graduates are able to secure the credentials they need to do the work that they want to do, which is rebuild their homeland, is they're able to return in a more sustainable way. So I'm just echoing Kat in that, education, higher education in light of one of the durable solutions, I think is key, and it is an investment, and I think it will compound, and it's so I hope that funders will able to see the value in that just going forward.
Thanks, HaEun. And just noting that we have the last few minutes here, folks, I just don't want to rush through the thank you. The thank you to the four of you for your time today to supporting Sheridan's International Education Week, and specifically this webinar. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think what's been demonstrated here is the collaborative approach that all of your organizations are taking to address the same crisis. And with that, I think it's a natural tee up to a call to action. So in the final minute, if we could go around, final 2 minutes here, to just get a quick point. What a call to action, regardless if it is our institutions on the call, whether it is possible volunteers, students, faculty, staff. What can we do? What is one thing we can do to support? And I open that to anyone who has comment. Michael?
No, continue to support the student refugee program. Colleges are a bit the way forward. We could see for expanding access to education and tertiary education in Canada as a pathway. The students who come through the program are some of the best ambassadors of this cause and such. And I would say, listen to them. They've got great ideas. Every one of them, I sometimes get into these discussions where people say, oh, you're robbing the intelligentsia, the intellectuals, the future intellectuals of these various refugee populations. No, not a single one. Every one of them that comes over here gets an education, wants to assist their family members, wants to assist their communities back in the countries of asylum, back in the countries of origin. So the cascading effect of education and this opportunity that colleges can provide is immense.
Can I just echo that to say, if you're a student, joining your local SRP community is a great way to get involved for all the reasons that Michael just shared. I think that in the context of our graduate program, if there are people who are looking to write, we have a roster of graduate students in Dadaab who are eager to collaborate, to participate in research projects, to speak. So, that's one way academics can reach out. But I'm assuming that a lot of the people on the call are from Toronto, and I think the SRP program is a great way to get involved.
Ms. Phyllis or Kat, any closing comments?
Yes, I just have a final one, just to emphasize that for many of, when we do have the cross-border meetings and we have populations of, let's say, from Somalia coming into Kenya for a meeting, and they are asked what is the most important thing that they want done in their country, they always say education, and it always comes at the top. So there is no way we can get away from it. As much as we have other priorities, they rate education as the first priority for them. And that's why maybe to some extent, the refugee camps continue to exist, because if the education system is not stable in their own countries, then they remain to ensure that their children access education. Thank you.
Ms. Kat, final comment?
Okay, I will end on a slightly more fun note because it's lunchtime, it's dessert time maybe. So my call to action is to eat chocolate. And by eating chocolate, you can support the student refugee program, not only at Sheridan and in the GTA, but across the country. So we have a really special partnership with Peace by Chocolate, which is a refugee-founded business on the East Coast. And if you buy some chocolate for yourself, for your family members for the holidays, $1 from every chocolate bar goes to support the program. So that's my call to action, amongst all of the other excellent calls to action that my co-panelists made.
On that note, I would just like to again thank the four of you for the time, your expertise, your experience in providing to us again. Thank you so much. And I'm going to eat some chocolate now. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sunand.
Thank you, Sunand.
Bye.